What if North Korea really did spin out of control? Pyongyang threatening nuclear war. Donald Trump bragging about what he calls an armada that he's dispatched to the East China Sea. The rhetoric seems so divorced from what's in either side's interest that it's easy to dismiss as simple playground taunts. But that's forgetting that officially the two Koreas are still at war, that Washington has more than 28,000 GIs permanently stationed south of the demilitarized zone that runs along the 38th parallel, and that recent missile tests by Pyongyang have now proven an ability to hit Japan. China's president's not laughing it off. He was on the phone to his U.S. counterpart overnight. Note that after Xi Jinping's visit last week to Florida, Mr. Trump's tweets imply that it's up to Beijing to rein in Kim Jong-un. Is that really the case? What to make of Washington's new way of handling North Korea and China? Will it be win-win all around in the end? Or could it go horribly wrong? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it's dangerous brinkmanship over North Korea. With us from Washington, Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korean Analysis. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We also want to welcome from the U.S. Capitol, Yan-Yo Kim, Senior Researcher at Johns Hopkins University's U.S.-Korea Institute. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome back to our studios. Dorian Malovic, Asia editor for La Croix, co-author of, in French, of North Korea in 100 Questions.
Hey,
nice to see you.
Yes.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, President Donald Trump woke up tweeting that he'd had a very good phone call with the Chinese leader over what Trump calls the menace of North Korea. This as a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group steamed towards the region. Catherine Viet has more.
As U.S. warships steamed to the region to carry out joint military actions with South Korea and Japan, North Korea vowed on Tuesday that any provocation will be taken as an act of war.
If the U.S. dares opt for military action, it's crying out for a preemptive attack. North Korea is ready to react to any mode of war desired by the U.S.
With tensions on the Korean peninsula the highest they've been in decades, Beijing is caught in the middle. A week after meeting the U.S. president in Florida, Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke by phone with Donald Trump, appealing for calm.
President Xi Jinping respects the goal of denuclearization of the peninsula, insists on maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula, and advocates resolving the problem through peaceful means. The United States clearly understands this position.
The heart of the problem is the threat posed by Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic weapons program. President Trump has threatened unilateral action if China does not do more to exert its influence on North Korea.
North Korea is looking for trouble. If China decides to help, that would be great. If not, we will solve the problem without them. USA.
The U.S. considers China North Korea's ally and believes Beijing has the means to convince Kim Jong-un to abandon the country's nuclear program. But some analysts say the West has long overestimated China's ability to affect Pyongyang's behavior.
Well, let's begin with that point. With you, Bruce Klingner. What do you think of Donald Trump's tweets?
Well, it certainly has raised uncertainty and anxiety in Northeast Asia. At this point, we're not quite sure what Mr. Trump is, what the signal to North Korea is. One would have thought that it was simply pressuring China to increase pressure itself on North Korea to fully implement required UN sanctions called for by the resolutions, to stop turning a blind eye to proliferation occurring on its soil. But now, after the Syrian attack and the deployment of the carrier strike group to the peninsula, there's concern that perhaps Mr. Trump is signaling a willingness to conduct a Syria-like strike against North Korea's missile targets.
He also said, I explained to the president of China that a trade deal with the U.S. will be far better for them if they solve the North Korea problem. Do you agree with that? China can solve the North Korea problem?
Well, certainly China can more fully implement the required sanctions. They have been pulling their punches, as the Obama administration was on sanctions. And when people say, well, China won't go along with increasing pressure or implementing the required sanctions. There are actually things the U.S. government can do to influence the Chinese banks and businesses that are engaging with North Korea. So regardless of what the Chinese government wants, we can influence Chinese entities from sort of weaning them away from engaging North Korea.
And should it get to that point? Should the U.S. Be pressuring those Chinese banks?
Well, certainly, because they're in violation of U.S. law. The vast majority of all international transactions in the world are denominated in dollars, which means they have to go through a U.S. Treasury Department regulated bank in the United States. If there's evidence of law breaking or unlawful action by any foreign entity using our financial system, then the U.S. should enforce its law. To argue against imposing the secondary sanctions on Chinese or other entities is to argue for giving immunity from U.S. law to those violators.
Dorian Malovic, you agree?
Well, I would agree, I mean, on the background, but it's easier to say than to do it. I mean, there are so many countries that are doing business indirectly with North Korea, starting with Malaysia, for instance, where I just come from now. The North Koreans, they have big business over there. They have business in Cambodia, and there are banks and companies who are doing business that as a front company, and the North Koreans are within that, you know. China can do more, obviously, but there are certain limits the Chinese won't overcross, you know, on sanctions on North Korea, because they don't want the North Korean regime to collapse.
Don't want the North Korean regime to collapse, and is that a good thing?
Oh, well, it's not for me to say if it's a good thing. I mean, you cannot ask the Chinese to put so much pressure on its neighbor, who is an ally, and they don't want the neighbor to collapse, so that to have a reunified peninsula with Koreans and Americans at the border. I mean, that's not acceptable for China. That's why, I mean, the States is saying China has to do the job, and the Chinese very calmly say, well, you have to do also the job on the American side, but not maybe striking North Korea. I think that would be very dangerous to start a strike on North Korea.
Yang Kim, let me ask you something, because we were in the newsroom on Tuesday when we saw those tweets by Donald Trump come through. And there was this moment of passing worry. We don't follow Korea as closely as you do, obviously. We were just wondering, was that a calculated policy move, those hard-speaking tweets, or was it an impulse by the new U.S. president? What did you think when you saw those tweets?
I think, at least for now, what President Trump is aiming at is deterring North Korea from doing any further provocations, including nuclear or long-range missile tests. And that's exactly what he's trying to alert to North Korea. And I think part of the reasons that the President Trump decided to reroute the Carl Vinson strike group to the Korean Peninsula is, again, pressuring North Korea to avoid any further provocations. And
but is that going to work? I mean, we heard the presenter on Korean television in that report warning of nuclear strikes.
Right. Increasing number of South Korean people are really concerned about possible preemptive strikes by the U.S., which would lead to all-out war, a very devastating war on the Korean Peninsula. So they're very nervous about that. But again, I think the whole message the Trump administration is trying to send to North Korea is don't do any further nuclear provocations. And China is somewhat cooperating on that message sending. I understand the Global Times, which is partially controlled by the government, already indicated some kind of limited oil restriction on North Korea if they really decide to go ahead with a nuclear test.
Yeah, upping the rhetoric in Beijing as well when it comes to Pyongyang, or the pressure, if you will. Bruce Klingner, is that an effective method, though, using Twitter in that way?
Well, the problem with Twitter or other sort of vague messages is that any kind of signal or message you're trying to send can be not only misinterpreted, but incorrectly interpreted, which can lead to governments to take action the opposite of what the U.S. was hoping for. So obviously the limits of Twitter communication or cryptic verbal messages, can cause uncertainty and lead to miscalculation. So obviously the president, any president, wouldn't want to telegraph military moves. But if before the parameters of the U.S. North Korea policy seemed to be an emphasis on re-strengthening the U.S. military after some degradation given the budget cuts in recent years, emphasis on ballistic missile defense, an emphasis on pressure and enforcing laws and resolutions, and a willingness to meet diplomatically, though not a resumption of negotiations until North Korea was at least willing to affirm its commitment to denuclearization, and that preemption was off the table. Now, the comments by U.S. officials, including President Trump, in the last week or so, now are talking about all options are on the table, that the clock has run out, that we will solve the North Korean issue. So, those have a more ominous tone, and we don't know right now if it's moving from sanctions to some kind of military action.
Some kind of military action, and the deployment of that fleet, and previous U.S. presidents have done that before, but the sending of this fleet and calling it an armada, is that a good thing?
Well, we have, as you point out, sent carrier strike groups to the area before. We do have one home ported in Japan. And the Carl Vinson was there recently as part of the ongoing U.S. South Korean military exercises. And from what I understand, the Ronald Reagan, the carrier home ported in Japan, is offline for a few months for repairs, so that it simply may be a case of, well, we need an operational carrier as part of the exercises. There was an announcement, I believe, today that the U.S. and Japanese navies may engage in a joint exercise involving the carrier. So it all may be sort of very business as usual. It's all part of the exercises. But again, coming amidst all these statements by U.S. officials and following the Syrian attack, it certainly has raised concern and uncertainty and perhaps a chance for miscalculation.
Yan-Yo Kim, the Japanese associating themselves as well with the deployment of that fleet. You were mentioning the worries in South Korea. How do people feel about this? Is this a good thing? It's shoring up South Korea? Or is it just a recipe for more volatility?
It was not clear to me, your question.
Basically, the fact that this fleet is going towards the Korean Peninsula and that Donald Trump is branding it an armada, is that something that will reassure South Koreans or not?
Well, in a way, it could be perceived as a reassurance, but for now, more and more people in South Korea are perceiving it as a risk, unfortunately. And there are a lot of rumors going on in South Korea. One of them is April 27th is the most likely D-Day for the U.S. Sending stealth fighters into North Korea. That's the most likely scenario that could be played out. That kind of rumors and sense of nervousness is spreading out among South Korean people, and I'm a little bit concerned about the possibility that that could brew some kind of anti-Americanism in the future. But for now,
yeah, especially in the context that you have a presidential election coming up,
right?
As well. How's this playing out on that score?
Usually, when it comes to the elections, in both general and presidential elections, the security issues didn't draw much attention and didn't have much impact on the results of the elections over the last several elections at least. But this time, some South Korean media described the situation as a security election driven by Trump. So they're basically characterizing the situation as increasing instability on the Korean Peninsula, driven by the U.S. I think that's one of the risks we have here in terms of the U.S.-South Korean alliance.
Doran Malovic, one of the policy analysts in Washington, is quoted as saying that this is a strategy that Donald Trump is using akin to Richard Nixon. Act a little bit crazy to keep the others off guard. Do you see this as a strategy?
Well, the comparison, okay, if you want to compare with Nixon, I would suggest President Trump, instead of sending the armada and tweeting that if China doesn't want to go with him, they would go alone. The states would go alone. So if Trump wants to do it alone, he has to board Air Force One, land in Pyongyang, and he will be very well received and start negotiations, the way Nixon did in '72 in China with China. I think that would be the thing. I know it's not easy to do, but that would be the safest way of negotiating rather than sending the armada. The message for the North Korean is nothing new with this armada. You have maneuvers in the East Sea and in the peninsula every year, in March, in April. For the North Koreans, it's obviously, surrounding the peninsula. They are feeling like they are, surrounded by enemies. So going alone, striking North Korea alone wouldn't solve anything.
Bruce Klingner, you agree?
Well, I think we do need to point out that North Korea is simultaneously also doing its ongoing winter training cycle, their annual military exercises, which usually culminate in a large-scale exercise in March or April. Most people don't seem to know that. So North Korea is exercising its own military. And, of course, North Korea is the one that has been threatening nuclear attacks on the U.S. and its allies really for years. And that they are the ones in violation of repeated UN resolutions. So, and on negotiations, sort of been there, done that. There are 8 international agreements that North Korea signed to denuclearize, all failed. The South Korean government has said they have 240 inter-Korean agreements, obviously not all nuclear, but all of those fell short of trying to induce political and economic reform in North Korea and moderating the regime's behavior. We've tried 2-party, 3-party, 4-party, 6-party talks with Pyongyang. All of those failed as well. So, and it's also hard to have a dialogue with a government that literally doesn't pick up the phone. They were the ones that closed the New York channel, the last official communication link between the U.S. and Pyongyang. They closed that last July. They were the ones that said after the December 2015 inter-Korean dialogue collapsed that the situation is worse than ever, and they're the ones that literally don't pick up the phone in the joint security area, which straddles the demilitarized zone. So the Obama administration, as well as its predecessors, have tried to have dialogue with North Korea, but it hasn't been successful.
All right, how do you get through to Pyongyang? We'll be asking our panelists when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.